Hey folks, welcome back to another review with yours truly, Sam Healey. Today we're taking a look at this little fella right here, Star Realms Frontiers. This is a standalone expansion for Star Realms. It has everything that you need to play just the basic two-player game, and it also has a bunch of challenges in it that can be played solo or cooperatively for up to 4 players. So this is actually a pretty neat little expansion that they have coming out. Let's take a look at what you get into it, and then we'll come back with some final thoughts in just a few moments. So what you see represented here is exactly what's going to be coming in a box of Star Realms Frontiers, the new standalone expansion for Star Realms. And you're going to be getting 8 challenge deck cards, which are oversized, and they're going to be for use in solo or cooperative play, anywhere from 1 to 4 players. All of them except for the Defy the Empire goes up to 4. This one you can only go 1 to 3. You're also going to be getting enough Vipers and Scouts to make 4 starter decks, and you're also going to be getting sets of authority counters for 4 different people as well. Then you're also going to be getting an 80-card faction deck, which has 20 cards for each faction, and of course, a deck of explorers to use. Now, the beauty of this expansion is that you can use it to play just regular Star Realms, no worries at all. It's a standalone in that respect. You can use this deck and the Explorers and, of course, all of the starter decks to play just regular Star Realms. Or if you wanted to kind of spice things up a little bit, you can take a crack at these different challenges that are also available in the deck, and you can choose what level of play you want to use, whether it be beginner, intermediate, veteran, or expert. And they have rules for governing all of those different kinds of difficulty levels. But let's go ahead and take a look at each of these challenge cards respectively. So the first challenge we're showing here is the Automatons challenge, and they are going to be getting 30 authority per player. So in a one solo, they're going to have 30 authority. With 2 players, there's going to be 60 authority, that type of thing. And basically, this challenge is you're fighting a entity that is assimilating your technology as you're fighting it. And so to replicate that, basically what's going to happen is they're going to have an assimilation count, and every time that it becomes their turn, they're going to play cards off of the top of the trade deck. And when they do that, they're going to look at the cost of the cards. And when the cost of the cards equals or exceeds the level of assimilation that they are currently at, then they're going to stop drawing cards, but all of those cards are going to get played. And of course, going to be attacking the different players and so forth and so on. So it is a single, a solo or a co-op version where you're trying to knock the automatons down to 0 authority before they destroy you. So it's pretty nasty. Then you have the Blob Assault Challenge, where the Blob Assault is going to get 40 authority per player. So that's also pretty nasty. On its turn, the boss plays the top card of the Blob deck. When playing with more than 1 player, it then draws a card for each player beyond the first. And so it says, see the back. So you have to look at the back of this, and it has all of the different rules here that govern this specific challenge. And so you just basically follow all of these rules here, and that's how everything works. So it's a pretty nasty one. This is going to be using cards from the Blob faction, so the other players that are in the game are not going to be the Blob faction is not going to be available to them. So that's interesting too. The Dimensional Horror is actually a really nasty one, because the Dimensional Horror will have tentacles of cards, 1 tentacle for each faction basically, and after each player's turn, this guy is going to add to those tentacles. And the way that the players co-oping against the Dimensional Horror win is by knocking all of the cards in each tentacle out completely. And so if there's any time within the game where there are no cards in any of the tentacles, the co-op players have won. The problem is that in order to knock out one of those cards from the tentacles, you have to have enough combat equal to the cost of the card, which can get pretty expensive. If you remember, some of those different cards are costing 8 and 7, so it's pretty nasty. But when a card gets added to a tentacle, that determines what kind of attack the dimensional horror is going to levy against the person whose turn it just was. So if it was a blob faction, the boss gains 5 combat, but that's added to the longest tentacle's power. So if the blob faction, for example, had 5 cards in it, the blob tentacle had 5 cards in it, it's going to be an attack of 5 plus 5. So that's nasty. The next one is the Madness of the Machine. In a similar fashion, the machine cards in the trade deck are going to be removed so that they can comprise the deck that is going to be used by the boss here, and he's going to be getting 40 authority per player. Then you're going to also take some Scouts and Vipers out of the basic set to add to the Madness the Machines deck as well. Each player is going to start with 8 cards in their starting deck instead of 10 because those Vipers and Scouts were taken out to go into the Machine deck. But players start with 60 authority, and it says here each turn the boss draws cards equal to the number of players plus 1 and plays them. And so it's pretty nasty. So the Nemesis Beast here is going to be getting 50 authority per player, and players are going to be a Hydra team if there's more than one, and they're going to be battling against that with a standard personal deck to start off with, and then they're also going to get 50 authority each. And then they also have that Hydra team working for them as well, where they can pool their combat, trade, and their trade amounts each turn to make their effects a little bit more powerful and work together a little bit more. So basically what happens here is on the boss's turn, they're going to scrap a card in the trade pile, and so the card that gets scrapped actually gets added in front of the Nemesis Beast, and the Nemesis Beast will then gain a number, a level of combat equal to how many cards are in front of it. Then the faction card that was revealed is going to determine what special effect the actual beast has to attack that turn. After he attacks, he ends the turn and it goes back to the player's turn. But it's a really interesting thing here. For example, here each player discards 2 cards if it's an Imperial card. If it's a machine card that comes up, each player puts a random card in their hand on top of their deck. So it's just diminishing the value. Over here, if it's a blob card, for each player, the boss destroys target base or gains 3 combat. And then here it says that for each player, the boss gains 5 health back. So that could be up to 20 health if that blue faction card comes up. So again, really difficult challenge. Now with the Pirates of the Dark Star challenge, he's only going to be getting 25 authority per player, but don't let that fool you, he is pretty nasty. Basically what's going to happen is that during the boss's turn, a number of cards equal to the number of players will be removed from the trade row and then refilled. So the first refill card is going to determine which effect, based upon the type of card that it is, will affect the first player. And then the second card reveal will affect the second player, and so forth and so on. So what are some of these effects here? Well, the boss attacks with combat equal to 2 times the cost. That player discards 2 cards as well. So, oh yeah, that's not too bad. It's just, if it costs 2, it's only 4 damage. Yeah, but what if it costs 8? That's 16 damage. Then you have to also lose two cards. Really difficult. The Machine Colt here, it says the boss attacks with combat equal to 2 times the cost of the highest cost card in the trade row. Again, really nasty. Blob card says the boss attacks with combat equal to 3 times the cost of the card. And then down here, the blue faction says the boss attacks with combat and gains authority, both equal to 2 times the cost. So again, these guys were incredibly nasty to fight. So that's the Pirates of the Dark Star. Now, the Defy the Empire challenge is the only one in the expansion that only goes up to 3 players. It's for 1 to 3 players, and it's going to be getting 40 authority per player. So basically, he's going to be utilizing the Star Empire cards, and he'll have his own deck to work from. And each turn, the boss will draw a number of cards and then you'll basically use the primary ability of a base. If you have a base available, you'll use the available ally ability, available double ally abilities. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And you just continue to do all of these things until you actually attack, and then you deal damage, of course. And it is a nasty challenge. Very similar to the Defy the Empire is the Cost of Freedom, which is basically the Trade Federation version of the Defy the Empire card. The difference being that this does go up to 1 to 4 players, and then you're only getting 40 authority per player. Then the boss is going to draw a number of cards equal to the number of players plus 1, and that will be his hand from each round, and he plays out those things in a very similar fashion to before, where he tries to use the ability of a base and an ally ability and double ally and playing the most expensive card out of his hand and all this kind of stuff. And if he does any of these things, he recycles and goes back to step 1 again, and it just turns out to be a very strange but yet a very difficult challenge to get through. These are definitely not for the faint of heart. That is absolutely true. These challenges are very difficult, and they do provide a neat, different way to play Star Realms, though. Now, the Trade Federation has a lot of really neat cards in it. It has no less than 3 different Frontier runners in it, which is going to heal you for 2 authority and give you 2 trade to begin with. And then there are also 3 orbital shuttles, which is going to give you 3 trade. But if you have 2 or more bases in play, you also gain 4 authority and you draw a card. So this is a really good card to play if you have a lot of bases there as well. Also has 2 patrol boats, which gives you 4 combat and 3 authority to begin with, but the ally ability gives you an extra 2, so that's pretty cool as well. Then there are 2 long haulers, which give you 3 trade, and then if you want, if you have the ally, you get an extra 2, but then if you want to scrap it, you can put the next base you acquire this turn on top of your deck. So that's a pretty interesting thing as well. Then there is the Federation Cruiser, which is a pretty nasty hombre. He gives you 5 combat and 4 authority. If you ally, he gives you an additional 2 and 2 for both of those. So that's pretty cool as well. And it's not that expensive either, just a 5 trade value. Then there's also the Gate Ship. Now the Gate Ship has a special ability that says that you can acquire a ship or base of cost 6 or less for free, and you put it on top of your deck. And then if you can ally, you also get 5 authority on top of that. Not too shabby for just 6 trade. Here, the Federation Battleship is going to give you 5 combat and 5 authority, and it gets you to draw a card. If you ally, you can also discard a base, destroy a target base, but then you can also scrap it for another 10 authority to heal. So those are pretty nasty ships in the Trade Federation. Now, the different bases are going to be, first of all, you have 3 outland stations, which will give you 1 trade or 3 authority, and then you can also discard or scrap it to draw a card. It also has 2 mobile markets in it, which are outposts, and it gives you 2 trade to begin with, and then you can scrap it to gain 2 and draw a card. And then at the end of the turn, you can move mobile market from the scrap heap to your discard pile. So that's a really cool effect there. Then there is also the Ion Station that gives you 2 trade. You can ally for another trade, but if you have 2 ally cards out there, you'll get all of these, and you'll also get 4 combat and 4 authority. So the Ion Stations is really cool. And then the Transit Nexus, which basically just gives you 3 combat, 4 trade, and 5 authority each turn. The Machine Cult trade cards are going to start off with the Builder Bot, which only costs 1, and it gives you 1, and then you also may scrap a card in your discard pile. If you ally, you can get an additional trade there, but then if you scrap it, you can also get 2 combat as well. So the Builder Bot's pretty neat. Then you also have the Plasma Bot, which only costs 2, and it gives you 3 combat, and you can also scrap a card in your hand, and if you ally, it gives you an additional 2. Then you have the Destroyer Bot, which costs 3, and it gives you 5 combat and the ability to scrap a card in your discard pile. So again, pretty cool. Then you have 2 Repair Mechs, which cost 4, and they give you 3 trade or you can put a base from your discard pile on top of your deck. So if you're really needing a base, this is a good thing to get. If you have an ally, you may scrap a card in your hand or discard pile. They also have an enforcer mech, which is pretty cool. It gives you 5 combat, and you may scrap a card in your hand or your discard pile. If you ally, you can destroy a target base. You can also scrap it to draw a card. So that's pretty cool for only $5. And then for 8, you can have the nanobot swarm, which gives you 5 combat, and you can draw 2 cards, and you can scrap up to 2 cards in your hand and or discard pile. So that's a really cool thing as well. As far as the Machine Cult bases, you have 2 integration ports that look like this, that cost 3. It is an outpost of 5. That's a really cool thing about it. And it also gives you 1 trade as well. Then it also has 2 defense systems, which cost 4. They are also an outpost of 5, and a possibility of up to 4 combat if you get that ally. Then you also have a conversion yard, which costs 5, as an outpost of 4, and you can scrap a card in your hand. If you do, you gain 4 combat, so that's pretty cool. And then there is the reclamation station, which is an outpost 6. You can scrap a card in your discard pile if you want. Then you can also trash this one to gain 3 combat for each of your cards that you scrapped this turn, including this one. So that's a lot of possibilities for a combat value. And then there is a neural nexus, which costs 7 and is an outpost 6. And you can scrap a card in your hand to discard pile and gain combat equal to its cost. If you ally, you also get to draw a card as well. So the Machine Cult is a nasty individual. The Blob faction deck has, first of all, 3 stingers in it that cost 1 each, but they give you 3 combat, and if you ally, another 3 combat. So a possible 6 combat for just 1. Love the Blob faction. Then there's also the Blob Miner, which costs just 2, but gives you 3 trade, and you can also scrap a card in your in the trade row, and then you can also scrap it to gain 2 combat. Then there's also the Crusher. It costs 3 and gives you 6 combat. And you can ally to get an additional 2 trade as well. Then there are 2 Burrowers, which give you cost 3 and give you 5 combat. And if you ally, you also get to draw a card, and you can scrap and acquire a card of cost 4 or less for free. And then there are 2 Moonworm Hatchlings that cost 4. It gives you 3 trade, or you can destroy a target base. If you have an ally, it's worth 3 combat. If you have double ally, it's another 3 combat. So Moonworm Hatchling is pretty nasty. Then you have the Pulverizer for 5 trade. You can scrap a card in the trade row and gain combat equal to its cost. If you ally, you can draw another card. And then you also have the Blob Alpha, which is simply 10 combat for only 6 trade. Then finally you have the Hive Queen, which costs 7, gives you 7 combat and the ability to draw a card. If you are allying, it gives you 3 more, so that's 10 possibility. But if you have a double ally, it's a possibility of 13 combat for just 7. The bases that come in the Blob faction cards are the Spike Cluster, and which gives you 2 combat, and if you ally, another trade. Then you have a Nesting Ground, which gives you 2 trade, and if you ally with it, 4 combat. Then you also have the Infested Moon, which gives you 4 combat to begin with, and then ally and double ally, you can draw a card on both of those. And then the Swarm Cluster is pretty nasty. Gives you 5 combat, plus 3 if you ally, plus another 3 if you double ally, and it only costs 8 to get. So Blob faction is really cool. And then finally the Star Empire faction, you're going to have 3 Frontier Hawks that only cost 1 but give you 3 combat, and you're able to draw a card and then discard a card. Then there are also 3 Cargo Crafts, which only cost 2, and they give you 2 trade, and then the target opponent discards a card if you ally for 4 combat as well. There are also 3 light cruisers, which give you 4 combat, and you can target opponent has to discard a card. If you ally, you get an additional 2 combat. If you double ally, you additionally get to draw a card. Then there are 2 farm ships which cost 4 trade, and they give you 3 trade, and then you can draw a card and then discard a card, and then you can also scrap that card for 4 combat. They also have a hammerhead, which gives you 3 combat and the ability to draw a card, and the target opponent has to discard a card. If you ally with it, you also get to draw a card and discard a card, so that's pretty cool as well. The Warpgate Cruiser costs 6, and you can discard any number of cards and gain 2 combat for each card that you've discarded. And then you can draw a card. If you ally, you can draw another card. And then the Imperial Flagship is 8 and gives you 7 combat and the ability to draw 2 cards. And then if you ally with it, the target player must discard a card. And then you have 2 captured outposts, which allow you to draw a card, then discard a card. Those cost 3, and they are also outpost 3s as well. The orbital gun platforms, there are 2 of them, and it's an outpost 4 for $4, and it gives you 3 combat, and you can scrap it for 3 trade. And then the jamming terminal gives you 2 combat, but the target opponent must discard a card, and it costs 5. And then finally, the Siege Fortress costs 7, is an outpost of 5, but gives you 5 combat, and if you ally, an additional 4. So all of these cards are really neat. Now, of course, we didn't talk about how to actually play Star Realms because we have done many videos about that in the past. We've done other reviews and that type of thing, so you can go back and check those out. But generally speaking, it is a deck building game where you are building up your deck, adding different things from a trade row, and trying to be as powerful as possible so that you can knock your opponent's authority down to 0 before they do the same thing to you. So generally speaking, in a nutshell, that is how you play Star Realms, and this is a really cool stepping in point for Star Realms. If you've kind of missed the boat, so to speak, since before now, as far as Star Realms is concerned, this is a great jumping in point because it gives you, first of all, everything you need to play the basic 2-player game. Also gives you the ability to play up to 4 players just using the basic deck that comes in the box. But it also gives you a bunch of challenges, 8 to be exact, that you can try. If it starts to get a little bit old for you, you can zap one of those challenges in and kind of zest things up a little bit. So I like the fact that it is a standalone expansion. I like the fact that you don't need a base game to play this. Everything that you need to play the game comes in this box, and that is great. So that's going to be really the main thing that I'm judging this upon, the fact that you can play the base game with what comes in the box, and you also get those other ways that you can try to play the game as well, with rules included for all of it. Now, I'm not going to do my normal pros and cons part because you already know that I like this game. You know that I like this game a lot. Now, Hero Realms is a little bit more fun for me right now, but I still really enjoy Star Realms because at the end of the day, the way they play, it's really the same. You just have different artwork, fantasy on one and space on the other. So you know that I already enjoy the game, but concerning this expansion, is this worth getting? Well, frankly, if you're already a Star Realms player, yeah, I can see you wanting to get this because it has brand new faction cards, 20 of each in the deck that comes in here. You're going to be getting more Explorer cards, which you probably don't need. I've never seen a game that actually ran out of Explorers, so you probably don't need more Explorers, but it does give you 4 base decks that you can use as well, along with the authority counters that come in it. So I really think that whether or not you're going to want to get this comes down to whether or not you're going to want those challenge cards that come in the deck, those 8 different challenges that can kind of spruce up the game a little bit for you. So that's really where your decision-making process is going to have to pick it up, because I've already showed you what's in there and what the different challenges kind of do and what kind of feel they're going to give you. But the decision on whether you want those and whether you want to pick up this entire box just for example, those 8, if you don't really care about the trade cards, but I don't know, I think that's kind of doing it a disservice. The fact that you're getting 80 new faction cards for your trade deck, I think that's, you can't really turn a blind eye to that. I think that's one of the definite strong points of this expansion. And then on top of that, you're getting these extra 8 challenges. So I think all in all, this is going to be one of those expansions that I think you should probably go out and pick up, just because if you play Star Realms a lot, it's going to add a lot of diversity to your game on top of those extra challenges. If you've never played Star Realms, you've never purchased it before, this is a great place to jump in, because it gives you everything you need to play the base game, and you have those extra challenges in there, and that will give you a very good feeling on, hey, do I want to go deeper into this game to find more out about it and possibly purchase more things about it as well. So those are the things that I think you should think about on deciding whether or not you're going to purchase this expansion. I would highly recommend doing so, because I think, as I've said before, it's good for both sides of the table, those who have been longtime Star Realms players and those who are just getting into it. So all in all, I'm going to give this expansion a 9 out of 10, because I love the fact that it's standalone. I love the fact that it is a good jumping in point, and I also love the fact that it gives a lot of new content to tried and true Star Realms players. So that's it from me, a 9 out of 10 for Star Realms Frontiers. See you guys and gals on the flip side.